Hi guys, welcome to Camp Online Day 7. It is so cool to have you all a part of this very first Camp Online with us. Today, we're going to jump a few years ahead of where we were yesterday. We're going to look at what it looked like for Jesus' disciples as they made more disciples. How did those people interact with each other, and how did they interact with the whole world around them? To do that, we're going to look at a whole book of the Bible. But don't worry, it's only 25 verses. We're going to look at the book of Philemon. Now that is a letter written from Paul to a man called Philemon. Philemon was a rich man in the city of Colossae, and it sounds like he had a big house because there was a group of Christians, a church, that met in his house. He was also rich enough to have some slaves. Now for us today, slavery is pretty shocking and wrong. But back in those days, there were some slaves that were treated really badly and some that were treated really well. Some slaves were given jobs like running businesses or teaching or looking after people in a house. So it was a big spread of what they did. But one of Philemon's slaves was called Onesimus, which means useful. But it doesn't sound like Onesimus lived up to his name. He was a pretty useless worker and ended up stealing from Philemon and running away from him. As Onesimus ran away, he ran into Paul, a man who had gone from killing Christians to setting up churches all over the place, including in Colossae. And maybe Onesimus ended up staying with Paul because he knew him from when he was in Colossae himself. Now you see, Paul actually needed a lot of help right now in his life because he was arrested, not for doing anything wrong, but for telling other people about Jesus. So Onesimus started helping Paul out, probably getting him food and helping him keep in touch with other people. Now we don't know exactly when, but while he was with Paul, Onesimus became a Christian. And he knew he had to go back to Philemon and make it right, what he'd done before. So Paul sent Onesimus back to Colossae with two letters. One, which we have today, is a letter of Colossians in the Bible, and the second we still have in the Bible today, the book of Philemon. So Paul starts out this letter to Philemon, thanking him for being kind to Paul and praising Philemon for how much he loves the church and Jesus. Then Paul goes on to tell Philemon how even though he could command him to do the right thing, he's going to ask him to do something nicely. Paul asks Philemon to welcome Onesimus back home and forgive him. Paul tells Philemon how useful Onesimus has been to him while he was in prison and how Paul loves him like a son. Philemon shouldn't see Onesimus as a slave or a worker, but a brother. Then Paul offers to pay for anything that Onesimus owes Philemon. Paul tells him to charge it to his account, but he also reminds Philemon that he owes his very life to Paul. And because of how well he knows Philemon, Paul is sure he will do everything he's asked and even more. Paul even asks him to set up a room in his house for him so he can come and stay later on. Now, there's a couple of things we can see from this letter about the early church. We can see that the first group of Christians didn't have big fancy buildings to meet in. They met in each other's homes, where they taught each other and shared food. And we can also see something really cool, that Paul didn't overlook someone like Philemon. He shared the gospel or the good news about Jesus with him. And that gospel completely changed Onesimus' life. He went from being useless to being really useful. And we don't know for sure, but there's some records outside of the Bible that make it seem like Onesimus went from being a useless slave to being a really important leader in the early church. There's a chance he's described as a man who was of inexpressible joy and a bishop or a leader in the early church. What's really cool from this is we can see how the good news about Jesus changes people's lives. What we're going to look at tomorrow is what that means for you and me today. So thank you so much again for being part of Camp Online. Keep sending us in photos and videos of all your challenges, the crafts you're making, and I'll see you all tomorrow.